Well, it's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Another edition of watching some boring guy in his home office practice public speaking into a mirror. Tonight, though, I do have a guest, and we'll get to that in just a moment. I didn't really know what to call tonight, so I called it a special performance, I guess. Why not? But really, it's technically part of our Art and Focus series, and the only reason it's not called as such is because we scheduled this after we sent the brochures to the printer. So for anybody who is familiar with our Art and Focus series, this is going to look almost identical in format. We have people watching today on both the Zoom webinar platform, but we have also decided to live stream this event directly to our YouTube channel. So we have people joining us from YouTube as well. The only difference is between watching it in these two platforms or through these two platforms is that if you're watching it from YouTube, we're happy you're doing that, but we're not going to be monitoring the chat on YouTube. So the only way to interact with me and Joe during the performance is by doing it through the Zoom platform. So if that's important to you, I have a few more minutes to my preamble, my shtick. So you can always log off YouTube and hop on over to Zoom. And then throughout the performance, you'd have the opportunity to raise your hand and holler at Joe. So please take this opportunity to do that. A couple minor matters of housekeeping. Throughout the program tonight, Joe's requested that people interact with him. And there's a couple ways that we can facilitate that interaction, right? We can have you just use the Q&A feature in the docking toolbar on Zoom. So it's labeled Q&A. You can submit a question, and we will address it at some point during the performance, maybe not right away, but when the time is appropriate. The other thing you can do is raise your hand, and I see some people have already raised their hand, or maybe not, they might have put it down. And if you do that, we will give you a little heads up, and we'll turn on your mic, and you can ask Joe that question or ask me that question, but I don't know what question you'd have to ask me when you have Joe Rowan here. You can ask our presenter your question directly, and he's more than happy to take questions in the middle of his performance. I guess the other thing to mention is if you tuned in last week for our first Art and Focus with Sam Miltich, you saw a different perspective of my studio. So I'm coming to you from my studio. Tonight, Joe's coming to you from his studio. You have the other view. I was flipped around, but in an effort to really up the production values and make this a kind of a more special event, I tried to clean up a bit, and not just myself, but my room. And I tried to pick out a special piece of art here that was maybe, well suited for the show we have tonight. And you'll see in just a moment what I mean if you aren't already familiar with Joe's work. So I brought in a plant, I brought in a piece of art, all for the guest who I'm going to introduce right now. So Joe Rowan is a performer and builder of experimental instruments. He's a graduate of the Berklee School of Music. He somewhat recently had a year-long residency as a musician in residence, I guess, at the Ace Hotel in Chicago. And he's also been an Art and Focus guest on a previous occasion, as well as having performed for South Shore Arts at a couple different events. Joe was awarded an I always want to say Indiana Artist Program, but it's the Individual Advancement Program grant by the Indiana Arts Commission about a year or two ago now. If it's important, he can clear it up for me when he comes on. I'm happy to have Joe here. Joe and I have spent a good amount of time, not just this last week or so, but in weeks previous, just chatting about art in general and maybe engaging in a little bit of critique and reflection about his making practice. I think he's fascinating. I think his work is incredible, and I'm happy that Joe has agreed to come back and be a guest of ours again. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk a little bit about how you want to get started, and I'm going to start monitoring the various chat and Q&A features here. So let me put a spotlight on you. And I think you might still be, no, you're unmuted. So I think we're good to go, Joe.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real treat to play for you tonight because usually I have to bring all of my things to some location and I can't fit everything because I've got to fit it in the car and set up in the space that I'm allowed to. But here I'm in my own home where I've got all of the things that I've pretty much ever made. So this is a real treat for me to come to you with all of my toys in play, which is unusual. If you don't mind, I'd like to play a little something first because I think it's best. Let's start out with a sample of what we're talking about, and then let's talk about it. All right, there's a little, what do we call it? It's an overture. It's a little sample of, I think, what you're going to hear tonight in miniature. Like Micah said, I'd really love it if you guys would either ask your questions or make comments or push back if you want on things that have been said, because it's much more fun if this can be a kind of interaction. And if you can let me know a little bit about, I don't know, where you're at with this. If you're coming from this as an art person yourself with your own art practice and you want to engage in that way, then we can steer the conversation that way. If you've got, I don't know, some other kind of perspective on this, just add it all in so that this can be more fun and convivial and interactive instead of just me yapping at you.
Well, Joe, in that spirit, and I see that somebody raised their hand, but before I get to that person, well, the hand went away. I know that sounds like we have some people who are sort of like material based. Well, let me not be cagey about it. I know the person who's asking. There's some people whose practices are material based, and they're very interested in like the origins of materials and the choices behind materials. So I guess that's all to say. What kinds of materials do you choose? What comprise your instruments? Why do you make those choices? Are there answers to these questions, or are we going to have people walk away disappointed?
For the most part, they're all made of some kind of pre-existing object, something that someone made for some other purpose that I have acquired by some means and turned it into a musical instrument. So here's an example that's a little more obvious because the items are easily recognized. This started out as a guitar, an existing guitar that someone made with the purpose of being played like a guitar. And I took the whole thing apart. I took all the parts out of it. I sanded all the paint off it. I just stripped it down to a box of parts. And then I attached these recognizable objects: tennis racket, broom, hockey stick, and cane, so that it still has the, I don't know what you call this, but a guitar has things, these straight, thin things that project off it. And so I guess I kind of remixed the guitar. I took the shape of a guitar and replaced it with familiar parts in an unfamiliar place. And I had been kind of daring myself to have an instrument with a big hole cut in the middle. And so I just kind of like dared myself to do it. I kept saying to myself, why don't you cut a big hole in it? Why don't you cut a big hole in it? So I cut a big hole right in the middle, just because I dared myself to. So this is how a lot of the instruments are. They're made of things. They're made of existing things. Some of the things are less obvious what they are, though. So here's an instrument with little things I've found. I'll try and get this a little closer to you. But it's full of little things that I've found. So buttons, a bubble wand, toy dinosaur, key, plastic snake, spool. All these things were also things that were out in the world having some other purpose. And I wanted to find them and bring them in. So they're all kind of a kind, which is that they're made from existing things, mostly, some in obvious ways and some in less obvious ways.
So Joe, I want to let you have the opportunity to play another song soon, but I also want to say, because I do know a little bit from having watched you perform and also having had you in Art and Focus and chatting with you, so you kind of described some formal challenges. You want to like try to break a concept of an instrument as much as possible sometimes. You also described that you make some just sort of purely aesthetic choices. You find some objects and you think they'll look kind of visually interesting. But then I think there's a third thing that I know the instrument you're holding in your hand right now doesn't fall into this category, but that some of your seemingly arbitrary aesthetic choices at first glance serve a purpose. And I guess I'm referring specifically to some of your color coding. Do you want to mention that now, or do you want to talk about that later?
There is a secret color coding system, but I'll have to say a little bit more about that. I think it's too early to give away the color coding secret yet.
I apologize. I'm going to make
No, that's good. We'll tease the audience. That way they'll stay tuned in instead of doing something else.
And maybe we'll never get to it, and they'll just walk away, as I said before, disappointed. Joe, I'm going to take the spotlight off me, and I'm gonna put it back on you, and I'm going to have you play some music.
All right, I'm going to do a quick tune here, or a tuning check, I should say. All right, there you go. That's one.
So Joe, we've got some stuff stacking up here. I'm going to address one technical question. Somebody did mention that your volume is a little louder than my volume, and I'm not going to ask you to do anything. I'm going to chalk that up to you having a nicer microphone than my MacBook microphone. And maybe now that we've lodged this concern on a public forum, South Shore Arts will authorize the purchase of a nicer microphone for their Art in Focus host. So I'm going to leave that where it is, and we're going to move on. I have one hand raised, and I have some Q&A questions stacking up. So let's get to a couple things right now.
Sure.
Where'd the hand go? So we're going to try to see what happens when we allow somebody to talk. So Summer Sheringhausen, I just allowed you to talk. So if you unmute yourself, I think you can talk.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yay. Hi, Joe. My name is Summer, and I'm here
Hello,
with
Summer.
Kevin.
Hello.
Our question for you is whether you have any instruments that you're currently in progress with that you could maybe share with us that are incomplete. Ethan was really interested in seeing kind of that process of how you get to these cool instruments.
I do. I usually don't give away the secrets of what's in progress, but since we are right here where the magic happens, it would be a little, it would be stingy of me not to. So yeah, I'll let you in on a couple things. I should tell you, so this instrument here is a clarinet, and it took a few tries to build a working clarinet. But once I figured it out, I made several clarinets. I'll get more around here, but they're all basically like this. And then it occurred to me that the ante could be upped a little bit by trying to make a double clarinet. So here's a double clarinet of some kind, and in the spirit of upping the ante, I thought maybe I could make a triple also. It's a triple, and it's also more or less too long to fit on camera in its totality. But this is 3 clarinets that kind of share a body. And then it seemed to me like to make one with 4 or 5 was just, there was no longer, once I had done it in 2 and 3, I had kind of proved the concept that you could make a multi-clarinet. So the next step for me would be a clarinet that you could play 2 at once. So on this clarinet, you can play in 3 different places, I think, but not at the same time. Your mouth can only fit over each mouthpiece one at a time. But here's a clarinet. I don't know how well you can see at home, but the mouthpieces practically touch. So that means you can put them both in your mouth at once. So the next thing is to make sure that each side makes notes that can be played simultaneously. But here's a triple clarinet with two at once.
So Joe, I think that was, I went ahead and oh, you came back with more. I apologize.
Oh, summer up. I got more for you. Here's another clarinet, except this has five protrusions off of it. And to this I intend to affix pool noodles to make some kind of squid-like clarinet. A clarinet that has dangly arms, so you can play clarinet and have a squid-like thing coming off of it. All right, and I may have one more. Let's see if there's one more right here.
So as Joe's trying to find something, I'm just going to also throw out a reminder. I heard some people are making comments on the YouTube side, and you may have joined late, but I won't be monitoring those during the performance. So if you want to interact with Joe directly, I'll ask you to hop over to the Zoom platform so that you can make a comment or ask a question or raise your hand. And then Joe left again. I guess I took my eye off Joe and I lost him and his pot of gold. Joe, can you come back? Would that be too much?
Yeah, we just have to. Here's a toaster violin. I've got a toaster and a piece of violin, and I'd really like to make this so that the toaster still works, because I think it'd be really cool to toast a piece of toast on stage, maybe eat the toast, and then play the toaster. So that's something to aspire to, I guess. So Summer, that's what I'm working on.
No, I'm gonna go ahead and ask one question. Somebody had put a question up right before you started your last piece. And I'm not, I don't know where you're gonna go with this, but Karen R asked if you had no constraints, financial, aesthetic, or otherwise, what kind of instrument would you most like to build?
That's a tricky one. The financial constraints are usually not the hardest issue. I don't know, it's maybe finding something that's really, finding the piece that starts the thing off is the exciting part. So I think financial constraints are not the biggest issue. It's just more, when will the next really interesting thing drift into my life that I say, oh, that would make a cool, I don't know, oboe or whatever.
On that note, Joe, or at least I believe on that note, somebody at the McElwins asked if you're going to play the big instrument. And I don't know, are you tonight, or is that sort of is your space and your setup not amenable to the big instrument?
No, I think it's possible. Let me see if I can fit it in frame here. It's this thing right here, and this is what I built with my Indiana Arts Commission Individual Advancement Progress Grant. I'm 6'4", and this thing is taller than me. And it weighs much more than me by a significant amount. So maybe let's push this back a little bit so I can play some of the things that are in front of it, and maybe I'll kind of weed some instruments out as we work our way back here, and then I'll play this.
Great. So Joe, I'm going to make myself scarce again. Well, I hope to get through most of these questions, but I do want to give you opportunities to play. So how about we play a song and then we take a few more questions?
Yeah, and also the folks at home, I usually, when I do a live show, which has been a little while now because of the restrictions of COVID-19, but usually I let the audience name the songs. And so people can do that tonight also. I don't know, either they can name the songs in the chat, or they can write it on a piece of paper and crumple it up, or they can just think it to themselves. Yeah, but feel free to name the songs. Because they don't have names.
I'll actually say that I know for a fact that our chat will save after we close out the event. So if you want to if you want Joe to be able to read those later, go ahead and throw them in the chat.
Yeah, put those in the chat if you want. Oh, you know what? Let's do start here. All right, let's see if this is on screen. This instrument here, I call it the kalimba on skis. Let's see if I can get to the bottom. It is on skis. I've never pushed it downhill. And a kalimba is a slightly simplified version of the instrument called the mbira, but they work on the same principle that they have metal tines that, when struck, make a pitch. And this is an electrified one. And the kalimbas and the mbira also are instruments from Africa. And African instruments like the mbira and the kora and some other ones have a unique feature that the player often is able to play one note with their right hand, and while that one is ringing, play another one with their left hand. So I play this one, and while that one is ringing, I can already start the next one and do this kind of rippling pattern. And that's one of the really cool things about the music for mbira or music for kora is that the players do these like rippling runs because they're meant for both hands to work. While one is working, the other is getting ready to work and can do its part right away. So here's the kalimba on skis and a little music for it.
Yo, I'm going to interrupt real quick. I'm not sure if this is going to mean anything to you because it doesn't mean a lot to me, but we have somebody who sounds like they might know something about sound and production, and I just want to throw it up there. They said that your feed's a little hot maybe, and that it's clipping. And if you could lower the feed gain maybe, that it might improve the sound quality. I don't know if that means anything to you.
Too hot. How's that? Is that okay, everyone?
That does sound a little better to me.
All right. All right. With that in mind, let's have a little sample of the kalimba on skis. music for kalimba on skis and other things.
Well, I'll remind people that, our audience, that they can, of course, name these tracks themselves as well, and encourage them to do so in the chat. Joe, as I throw a few more questions at you, I want to make sure that I also just once again extend our gratitude to you for coming back and performing for South Shore Arts again. I'd love to continue this relationship, you know that, and we're just really thankful. And I do know that last May, when things were pretty bad, we were scheduled to host you for your after party for your big sort of culminating IAP grant event, and that didn't happen. So I like to think in some small part this, it doesn't make up for it. It at least, shows that we really wanted to do it, and that we intend to do it again at some future date. I'm going to throw a few questions at you, but I'm also going to say that the feedback we were getting from one of our audience members was from Greg in Miller Beach. So apparently you know him. He said to tell you, and that it's still doing it a little bit. So if there's anything you could do while I'm throwing questions at you to clean it up, I think, by all means. But if you think it's the best we got tonight, then it's the best we got tonight, and we're just going to make do.
Okay.
One question I have is from August Sheehy, and it says that Joe, they love the instruments and the way you're using them. They're curious about the kind of looper you are using. So do you want to talk a little bit about any of your hardware that you have there?
Yeah, let's talk about the looper. This thing here is the looper, and it's called a looper because it lets you make a recording live on stage wherever you are, and when it gets to the end, it starts over at the beginning like a loop. So you play a little something, and when it gets to the end, it repeats again right where it was, making a continuous loop. So the way this works is that I can lay down like the rhythm part. Here's the rhythm, 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 and so this part just continues, and then I can do the next part. Here's the rhythm, the bass, the rhythm, the rhythm, bass, the rhythm, the bass, the rhythm, the bass. And if I want, I can stop the first part. The bass, and now the second thing continues. So this is how I make the music, is that this has got 3 different places to record 3 simultaneous loops, and I build them up. So I'll play one part, and then another, and then another, and then I can play a solo, or I can think about what's something that I could remove and have what's left over be the seed for a new thing. So that's the gist. The looper.
Right. And then we have a question about when you started. When did you start your art practice? And I think you answered this earlier. You are professionally trained. You attended the Berklee School of Music, so I assume you started playing instruments sometime before college. Would be my assumption.
Yeah, my art practice was basically me doing some version of this, but as a kid. So I had an interest in the visual arts and in music, and to some extent the performing arts, but not a real specific loyalty to any one of them. I think I just liked the creative act, and I liked that you could start with nothing and have something, or you could start with something and take it apart and then put it back together. So I've basically been doing some version of that the whole time. As a kid, it was just play, but it was play not unlike this. In high school, it was more like kind of making a mad dash around between the art department and the music department, just fleeing from whoever it was that was trying to tell me to get serious about one or the other. And basically that in college too. Ultimately, I had to pick art or music to study in college, so I chose music and went to music school, but was as interested in art. I was sometimes like skipping out on my assignments to do visual art. So basically this is the art practice. It's just been getting a little more legitimate.
Well, on the note of legitimacy and your art practice, Joe, I'm gonna make sure I bookmark a question I have personally for after the next track. But I wanted to let you know that the McElwins, they dubbed the last track "Wax Spit." If I'm reading that.
Okay.
And then before you transition to that song, your next piece, I can't read their name. But somebody asked, what instrument has presented the biggest challenge to create? Is there a single piece and a reason why?
Well, the big one here, this one has a name. Usually they don't, but it's called the Astroidia. And that's the name of the, help me here, science people. I think it's the name of the phylum that starfish belong to, is Astroidia. And I like it also, I like that name because it kind of has a starfish design in it. And also the word looks like the combination of astro and idea. So all of those things together make me think that that's a good name for this. But this was the hardest because not only is it so big and cumbersome, but it's full of all these little stipples. So if you can see it as close as I can, I can't really move it because it's on big heavy legs. But it's covered with these tiny little loops that just took weeks and weeks to paint. And some of it required a little bit of precision woodworking, which is typically not my MO. But I had to cut this harness here that holds the extra strings. It had to be cut really precisely, and the neck had to be joined really precisely, especially since with these big heavy strings, there's a lot of tension on it. So for the woodworking and the intricacy, those two things made this one a much bigger challenge than I normally have. Set this up a little bit. So that's the answer to that.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Joe, why don't you go ahead and play a little bit more, and then we'll break for some questions again.
Let's see. I'm going to move the looper a little closer to where I am over here. That's the astroidia, the big instrument.
So Joe, I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about as your art practice and the way you think about the objects and the making of the objects. And you can take my question and do with it what you will. But I know that you and I talk a little bit about these things in relationship to your instruments. So I'm just curious to hear you talk about it publicly a little more. We talk a lot about how you don't know what these mean always.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like words are sometimes not only inadequate to describe like what you bring to them and why you do a thing, but they're also maybe sometimes not meant to. You might feel like there's an unfair hierarchy placed on words over the object itself. And I was wondering if you feel comfortable maybe talking a little bit about this idea that these objects each sort of embody one simple sort of easy to communicate meaning that you actually can possess and articulate, or how do you think about these objects like in a way where they're sort of like a mediation, like you use them to mediate an experience with your audience, and that that meaning might actually change over time or change depending on context? Like how much, we've talked about it briefly, but how much do you think about that sort of thing?
It kind of drives people crazy because they're coming to me for all the right reasons, either at a performance or people who know me, fellow musicians, about articulating what they mean in words. And I kind of have a feeling like if I could just say the thing I wanted to say, I wouldn't need to build the thing. And for me, it's sort of like if someone says to you, a beautiful sunset. Someone saying a beautiful sunset to you doesn't have any of the raw, emotional, visceral punch of seeing a beautiful sunset. Anyone who's seen a beautiful sunset where the sky gets all violet and there's just this like burst of orange coming over the horizon. I mean, I'm doing my best to articulate it now, but even that doesn't compare with like a fully in-body feeling of the beauty of a beautiful sunset. The words just don't do it justice. And I have a similar feeling about this kind of art, that if you could just say what it was, if you just say, yeah, it's a shovel, but it's also a guitar, and the places where one ends and the other starts is not totally clear, but it's also kind of not important. That for me does not do justice to the experience of seeing it. I think anyone who sees it gets the gist a lot better than I could say what the gist is. So for whatever that's worth, that's the point of view I have about it, is that these are all objects that say something that you couldn't just put a word or a sentence to. I don't mind if people do, and I think it can be fun if you want to say, all right, well, let's get into the nitty gritty. Where can we draw the line between shovel and guitar? And if it's 50-50, then what would something look like if it was 25% guitar, 75% shovel, or the other way? I find that interesting, but the art part has everything to do with things that are more interesting to encounter than they are to try and explain. And in some cases, I think kind of like explaining why a joke is funny, the explanation undoes some of the magic. I think some of this is better just to leave yourself in a place of experiential approach and not necessarily try and pick out what the point of the joke is. I think the joke is just funny just because it's funny.
I'll let you leave it at that. And I appreciate you taking a moment out of the performance to talk a little bit about.
And your hate mail to Micah Bornstein, care of Sure Arts.
Or, really this is an education program. So by all means, if you have a grievance, file it with the Director of Education. You can find that individual's email address on our website. I'm sure if it's important, it'll find its way to me. Carrie Ann asked, do the surfaces embellish, do these surface embellishments affect the way you play? or what you play or the quality of music? Are there, I mean, I guess, are there compromises? Are there limitations?
Carrie Ann, it's a really good question. Let's take this as an example. So this is something at least sort of like a cello. This started out as a cello that I took apart into its constituent pieces, and with the neck of it, I kind of made the rest. Part of that included taking all these are all wooden circles. These are all 3D objects that I painted teal, yellow, and pink, and I glued them all around the entire body of the instrument. And you can see on the back, it starts from here. This is the middle one, and the eyes all kind of point out from the middle. So these all kind of point towards the corner and up. The front does that too. They all, except on the front, they all point inwards. You can see all the pink part's little like eyeball is all looking in towards the center. So that's one fact to keep in mind. So sometimes people will say, these things that you put on your instrument, are they just decoration? And my response to that is they're not just decoration, they're decoration. So it's not like the decoration is just an afterthought, even though it doesn't affect the sound per se. So I don't think this instrument would sound radically different if it didn't have all these teal and pink eyes glued all over it. But it is the essence of the instrument. So it doesn't affect it in a sonic way, but it affects it in some other kind of way, which again, I don't know if I can articulate what it is. But even though it wouldn't sound different without all this stuff on it, it has to have this stuff. This is just like the essence of the instrument. So on whatever level that manifests itself on, it's very important. It's just not acoustic per se. Carrie Ann, I hope that was something even remotely like an answer.
Well,
sometimes I just try and talk until I feel like everyone's been satiated with speaking.
That's similar to my strategy, Joe, which is I try to talk long enough that everybody just gets bored and tired and then leaves me alone. It works most of the time. I do know that it won't work with Carrie Ann. I do know her, and that if she's not satisfied, she'll holler at us again, and that's fine. That's why we appreciate Carrie Ann. Greg from Miller Beach wanted to know a little bit about that weird pink instrument to your left. He thinks it looks like a crazy clock. I doubt that it is, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, you know what's funny is I get that a lot. People say it looks like a crazy clock, and I don't see it, but I know just from sheer frequency of being asked that it does, which is kind of the tantalizing thing, is that there's something that everyone knows about this instrument that I don't. Everyone seems to think it's like a clock. I don't get that, but I think that's all the better, because I don't assume that I'm just by being the one who made it, that I'm necessarily in a privileged position. I'm also not certain how it's tuned. But what happened with this, I think this may be the middle that I cut out of the other one. There's a strong chance that this round thing is the center that came out of this instrument. But I've cut the centers out of more than a few. And so after cutting the middle out, what I was left with was the nicely routed channels that the electronics of this instrument had come in. And so I thought it'd be a real shame to waste this. I could put some electronics in, and it would be perfectly, someone had already done a certain amount of work for me by doing that. So I kind of conceived of this instrument, and I had this little like nagging feeling that I was going to do something different. I was basically going to not use the electronics cavity, which turned out to be true. So the inspiration for this instrument was having this bit routed out for me. And what I ended up doing was filling it in tediously with sawdust and glue, building up the layers until I had a flat surface again. And what I put in there instead was a cat food can that I spray painted yellow. and attached electronics to the underside of. So this is basically an electric cat food can inside a very fancy body. But I've been calling it the amoeba. I don't know if this is really what an amoeba looks like. This may be more like a Golgi apparatus, but I've been calling it the amoeba. So whether or not it looks like one, that's what I think it looks like.
So, Joe, I am tasked with the unfortunate responsibility of keeping an eye on the clock. We are fast approaching 8 o'clock. It's 7:58. We're not going to get to all the questions. I know that. What do you want to do? How do you want to end this? Somebody wants you to play a saxophone. Somebody else wants you to answer questions or talk about the color coding system. Somebody, maybe Joe wants something altogether different with regards to how he closes out his set. I'm going to leave it up to you, and then I'll come back at the very end and say a few parting words. But I want to give you the opportunity to play us out. I think that's a great way to end a musical special performance / art and focus.
Yeah, I'd love to play, but I have to say one thing first, which is that none of these things are saxophones. All of these things are clarinets. And if that's not clear to you, at home, or wherever you may be, the difference between a clarinet and a sax is that a clarinet is a cylinder. So it's a little hard to see with the keys in the way, but this instrument, except at the very extremes, never gets any wider. It's the exact same width all the way down. There's a little flare here, but that doesn't make it sound any different. You could saw that off and it would be exactly the same. This is a cylinder, whereas here's a saxophone, and the saxophone is a cone. It's a bent cone, but it is a cone. It always gets wider as you move along the body. It never stays the same width, and it never gets any smaller. It only ever gets wider. And the reason that's important is that air inside a cone behaves one way, and air inside a cylinder behaves another way. So if you thought, maybe from like grade school band, that a saxophone sounded like bright and brassy because it's made of metal, and your clarinet sounded kind of woody and mellow because it's made of plastic or wood, you could do the opposite. You can make a metal clarinet and a wood saxophone, and people have, and each one still sounds like a clarinet or saxophone. It has only to do with what certain kind of air does in a constrained space. And cone-shaped air does saxophone-like stuff, and cylinder-shaped air does clarinet-shaped stuff. And these are clarinets because, again, except for the very extremes, and it doesn't stop at, if we made this not have a big bell on it, these are just cylinders. These are long cylinders, and for the most part, they never get any wider or narrower. So these are unquestionably clarinets.
So Joe, we can hang out for a couple more minutes. People can drop off. I want to give you time to finish the way you want to finish. I want to also let you know that Karen Zucro told us that the pink clock, the cat food tin can, or the cat food tin instrument, reminds her also of a COVID virus. So now we have that to thank the pandemic for, that association. I also want to say that it's great when you pull off, like you start to pull into the frame all these actual instruments, right? You had a saxophone on hand to make to make your point. And
yeah.
One night when we were talking, people don't see it off frame, but like Joe's studio is a repository for like more recognizable instruments as well that serve as sort of the basis for like the way he thinks about music, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I commented on that one night, and one of the things that Joe said to me, which is I think one of the things, the funniest things Joe's ever said to me, is he's found that if you walk around town with 2 broken guitars, chances are somebody's going to give you a third.
It's happened far more often than sheer chance would predict.
All right, Joe, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We're going to have an eye towards wrapping it up, but don't feel too rushed.
All right. If this is the end, if we have to cut it off before I get a chance to speak again, thank you all so much for being here. It really means the world to me. to share this stuff with you. And it's been harder to share this stuff in the last year, given the obvious circumstances. So it's all the more meaningful to have a chance to play for you and share this stuff, because it means so much to me. And I hope it means at least a little something to you. And if it does, then I'll feel like we all got something out of this. So here's some music. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks to South Shore Arts. And here's some music for you to get back to your evening with. Thank you so much.
Joe, I couldn't be happier, and I can't wait until we can have you back at South Shore Arts to perform in person. I can't address everybody's questions and comments, but we have so many just sort of notes of gratitude and pleasure in the chats, especially. There's clapping. Everybody's just really pleased. So once again, thanks, Joe. I want to answer one last question regarding the announcement of Joe's 2024 presidential bid. Joe Rowan has formed an exploratory committee, and he's weighing his options. He's talking to his family. He hasn't decided one way or the other, but he will come back and announce it on the show if he does. So thank you, Sarah, for that question. I presume Joe knows Sarah, so that's why I grabbed that question. Next week on Thursday the 7th, we'll resume our normal schedule for Art in Focus. We will have at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we will have Francisco Loyola. He's an artist and community organizer from Kenosha, Wisconsin. and he's going to talk a little bit about his art practice as well as his community organizing in relationship to the unrest and protest in the wake of the shooting of Jacob Blake. So he'll be here. We'll be to a visual arts program. Hope you can join in. Tell your friends. This is our second virtual Art in Focus like performance, and I'm happy to say that we had over 50 people tune in to watch Joe between Zoom and YouTube. So I think of that as a great success. I think we did a pretty good job tonight, Joe, and I can promise everybody that our production will continue to get better. I'm having a lot of fun, and to paraphrase our director of education after last Thursday, to start up some of our normal programming again, in addition to classes and exhibits. Every time we resume some degree of normalcy, it just sort of makes us feel like we're not toiling behind our computer screens, and fills us with a little bit of delight and a little bit of joy. And I think it's something that we need right now for sure. And I hope you do too. And I hope that we brought that to you. So Joe, any parting words before we sign off for the night?
No, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thanks to you, Micah, for hosting, and to John Kane for presiding over South Shore Arts. And have a good evening, everyone, and stay safe out there.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Joe.
Night.